Okay. Into the session itself, because I do try to stay disciplined about keeping this within an hour. So a little bit about the group that you're in right now. It's a community of about 2,500 designers between a LinkedIn group, a Facebook group, and a Slack group. All of it kind of like rolls into uxcandor.com, which is a part of my personal portfolio. Hi, I'm Yuri Zaremba. If you don't know about me yet, I provide mentorship to early and mid-career UX designers. And I'm joined today by Nathan Robertson. He's a UX strategist and a founder of a Seattle-based small studio. He's a proud dad and learns as much from his kids about leadership and coaching as the workplace. Before going off on his own to build out his own studio, he consulted. He was a principal UX designer at Capital One, at Microsoft, at Amazon. So he's done all the big tech stuff. And he was an agency designer at Artifact, one of their first ones. So something I love about Nathan's experience is that he can really speak to every possible direction you could take your UX career. He's done the agency time, he's done the big tech time, he's done the solo time, he's done the consulting time. So Nathan, we're really excited to have you, and thanks for agreeing to join.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And I like to mention that the majority, if not all my guests, I have a personal connection to. And me and Nathan actually worked together at Amazon. So that's how I knew that he was going to be good in this session. So first question that I wanted to ask you, Nathan, is, looking at your experience, kind of having experienced everything that I just kind of did an overview on, can you speak to like the benefits as well as like the differences and pros and cons between being an end-to-end UX generalist versus being a specialist, and maybe touching on a term that you like to use a lot, which is a UX unicorn?
Yeah, I could definitely talk to that. The path that I've taken has been sort of a long one that meandered through a lot of different areas. And I'd say the advantages of that are, it's really important, especially it seems like it's increasingly important to work cross discipline and be able to relate to people in different roles and from different points of view. And so spending a little bit of time actually wearing their hat, as opposed to imagining what it's like in their shoes, it does help with that. The thing that I would say the cons are, the downside to it is, like anything in life, any field, any area you can try to develop skills in, you can always go too deep. You can spend a lot of time going into something. And so particularly like the one that I've spent the most time in that is more, I think is moving towards diminishing returns. It depends on what you want to do. But if you were just looking to be a UX designer in a large company, I would say that getting into the tech side, the engineering, like really learning how to write really high quality code, that's not as valuable as it used to be for designers, especially since there are so many tools. Figma and even Framer makes a lot of things that are a lot that would take you a long time to figure out how to do for yourself. It just makes it available out of the box.
So would you say that there's any benefit to just choosing one of those directions? So the topic of today, as a reminder to everyone, is like, what's the difference between a great designer versus just another designer? And Nathan is one of the great designers that I've worked with. So like, in being an end-to-end designer versus being a specialist, like in choosing both directions, like how do you become great in being a specialist, or how do you become great in being a generalist?
I'd say that to the first question of why you want to go down one route versus another. Like if you want to be a UX, what I call a UX unicorn, where you're kind of have your feet in all of the ponds and you can do a little bit of everything, essentially the path I ended up taking. But I ended up doing it over the course of like coming up on like 24 years. I'm going to be a dinosaur. If you do it gradually and build it up over time, you can have the ability to essentially see, not only see other people's perspectives, but it also gives the ability to work with those disciplines and with a little bit more empathy, with a little more like from actual experience. But also, I'd say the real question is like whether to be a UX unicorn or not, right? Like if you're just going to really specialize and be the best in one area, to work at a company, if you're working in the big companies, they want somebody who's really specialized in an area. They have lots of people, and they want somebody who comes in and brings something very unique and specific to a larger team. And the larger the teams are, the more need there is to be specialized, right? So I'd say if you're going down that path, you're going to be looking more of generalizing. You're going to be looking at working for startups, for a company where there really is room to do anything. You can show up one day and write some code. You can show up the next day and do all of the research. You're not going to be butting heads with somebody who wants to figure out what the research plan is because there's nobody there. But if you're in a larger company, you come in and you say, okay, this is my research plan and this is how I'm going to do it. There's some people who are going to be offended. They're going to say, wait a minute, I am actually a researcher. I've spent my whole life learning this discipline. And there'll be a limited extent to which you can be involved in helping them make that plan, but it's not going to be as welcome as where in a smaller company, you can come in and bring that value. So that's, I'd say, to the first question of whether to go this route of becoming a generalist, even over the course of a long career like I have, it's where do you ultimately want to go? And the reason why I think it was the right answer for me is because I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be involved in startups. I'm trying to do my own, start my own company right now. So it's useful in that situation. If you're trying to chart a much longer career within one company, which I haven't done, I've had a tour at each of the larger companies here in this area, but I haven't gone for like the 10, 15-year career at one company. And in that case, I'd say specializing would be much more the path to take.
Yeah, so it really sounds like even from like a hiring manager point of view, right? Like when you're hiring in a large organization, like you have a really specific need that you're trying to fill. Like you already have, like, let's say 4 designers on your team. You're looking to fill a specific gap. So in having a specialization, like you're giving even hiring managers the opportunity to potentially pick you up and be like, okay, this is actually the very specific need that I'm trying to fill, outside of just having another designer on staff. Whereas like for a startup or a smaller company, they're trying to get as many employees out of you as a single employee as possible. So if you come in and you are also their staff researcher and also a staff front-end engineer at the same time, they just got 3 employees out of 1 employee. So that's a great point, which leads me to my next question. What are some hard skills that you see as relevant to success, like at a higher level? So this is like, okay, I've been doing this. I've been a UXer for 3-4 years now. I'm really kind of trying to break into the next level and establish myself as a lead. What are the hard skills that are going to be really important for me to make that jump?
Yeah, I'd say at the highest level, the way I think of the UX skill set and the way I would evaluate if I was looking specifically, well, regardless of unicorn or designer in general, I'm going to be evaluating them on their UX methodology, which essentially covers all of the UX skills, like the work that you do as a UX designer, creating experiences. The next one I would say is visual design, which can be a wholly entirely different discipline, but it's something that I found on like you probably found this, or you must have found this when we were at Amazon. There was a high expectation that there was no separation. It wasn't like you had a designer you could just hand this off to and make it pretty. Some places I've worked, it's like that. You figure it out in wireframes and somebody else does the rest of that. And then there's the one that I think is most under discussed, the one that is I think most designers are the least aware of, and I think has the biggest impact on their success, is writing, particularly UI, writing for the UI, but also writing in general is all communication. That's the way the business thinks about things, is writing. They write things in documents. Business people are that's basically where business happens. That's where ideas essentially are communicated, is in documents. So writing is the one skill I think that all designers could benefit from increasing their ability in. And then there's research, also its own discipline. And then there's tech, which used to be, when I was getting into this field, learning to code was just a part of the job. If you want to do a prototype, there was no way to do it without writing code. Nowadays, that's not the case, and so you have more choices. But there's also benefit to understanding tech from the perspective of, you're creating these designs and they actually have to be built by somebody. And so the more you understand about what's involved in actually making it and what kind of challenges the engineers are facing, that's going to make your design better, because you're going to be able to be more tactical, delivering things that are going to get built. At the end of the day, you want to create designs that actually reach customers, that get done. And the more that you understand the tech team, the better that you can do that.
That's a huge point. Yeah, like actually understanding the tech team is one thing, but on top of understanding the tech team, like understanding the space that you're actually in. Like I found that so often designers just try to speed through to like doing the design, that they don't even wrap their heads around like the actual vertical, like the market that they're in. Like if you're going to be redesigning like an insurance platform, go and get a textbook and learn how insurance works, right? Like when I worked at Alexa, like half of the work was actually like doing the reading, learning how radio frequencies work. Like in the process of becoming like a designer, it's important to become an expert in the space itself. Like you just take like design is just one ingredient of that, but you want to be able to talk at the same fidelity and the same level as like the highest engineer, like the smartest engineers on the team that are saying that this is the way that this product works, and the smartest business stakeholders on the team. And putting design aside for a second, if you're just able to speak at the same level about the tech and about the industry, you've already earned a seat at the table.
Yeah.
So that's awesome stuff, man. A couple other things that I'd love to mention is like some really high level hard skills. So things that are a little bit more strategic is take the opportunity to always be thinking about the vision of whatever you're working on. And the vision might be something super lofty, like what is a revised mission statement to this entire company, or it can be something much narrower in scope. How does this feature affect the broader product, and how can it potentially change the broader product, like at a fundamental level? Like, and you can either be building that vision by doing what Nathan said, just like do it in writing, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people maintain kind of like high level thoughts by designing in words as opposed to pixels, just so that they don't lose them. Maybe it's about like capturing requirements or challenging requirements. Or you could do it in a straight up design file. So for the longest time, again, using Alexa as an example, just off the books, I maintained a completely different sketch file where like in any spare time I had, I was building out a whole other vision for the product. And I was able to pick that up off the shelf when the opportunity presented itself, and like it eventually does. The other thing that I wanted to mention is just at a more tactical level, at a lower level, at something that you could just start doing immediately, is just outthink everyone else. So I find that a lot of the time, like we so lean on the like the research, the inputs, waiting on all the answers to fall on our lap, that we can wait for all those inputs to just do the design for us. And then when it's finally time to take those inputs and do the design, we just pick a thing and say that we're going to validate it in usability. We just want to speed through it. You're a designer, right? Your job is to do the design. So park there, and until like you're pulling your hair out because like you've already explored 8 completely different ways to solve the problem, like don't move on. Like make sure that like there's no stone left unturned. Make sure you've explored every stupid idea, like because the stupid ideas are going to come up when your executives are reviewing your design progress and they're like, hey, did you consider doing this thing? And it might be the stupidest idea, but if you've already considered it, you can speak to it, and you can speak to how you eliminated that as an idea.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'd say to that point, I'd say that having passion, really being driven. And I think the place where that really comes from is having purpose. Like if you really care about what you're delivering to the world, what change you're trying to make, excuse me, in the user's life, then that'll drive you to really go deep to, design is not an easy, you can't just show up, sip your coffee, look at your email and get the job done. I've had so many projects where, I got the requirements. I just started cranking on it because because that's just the way I work. I just do as much work as I can, as fast as I can, and try to go as deep and solve it from as many ways as possible as I can. And I had no way to know in the beginning, but at the end of the project, like I remember some projects where we were driving to the client and I was like literally making changes to a prototype in the passenger seat of this car as we're like pulling into the place. Like you don't know how much time you're going to have. And at some point, mouses are down and you got to hand it over. You don't know when that point's going to have. So you just have to always push as fast and as hard as you can to get to the best solution, because at some point it's done, you finished it, you've got to move on to something else. You want to make sure that you really did use every second that you had to the best of your ability.
Yeah, that's a great point. Continuing down this track, what are on the other side of this? What are some soft skills that you think are critical, specifically at a higher level? So if we assume that you've already got the super basic communication stuff down, what's kind of like the next step for soft skills that you got to master in order to truly become a leader?
I'd say the biggest one, the one that is almost all encompassing, is listening. Having the ability just to really listen to the customer, not just the act of sitting there and hearing what they're saying, but internalizing what they're thinking, sleeping on it, being changed by it, and actually having it affect the work. If it seems like, the other thing also is even just signaling it. Some designers will do a really good job of incorporating the feedback, but if it doesn't, if they're too focused on the work and they're kind of just cramming, and when they get the feedback, they don't seem to give signals that I hear you. That could be really important to, that's one of the most important things I find. People want to feel heard. Sometimes actually being heard may not matter as much as realizing that they hear you and that they're incorporating what you're saying. So I'd say really it's listening across the board. Anything you do, listening is going to be the most effective thing that can really help designers break through to the next level.
And I feel like one of the components of becoming a better listener is learning to ask better questions.
Oh yeah,
right?
For
like,
sure.
That was actually something that I struggled with like pretty much my entire career at Amazon. That was like 7 years. Like I always wanted to just listen and then say like, okay, I listened, I got your stuff. Okay, I'm gonna move on and do my thing. It's a lot harder to actually like take something that you didn't want to hear and then probe further on it, because it's almost like scraping at a wound. Right? Like I already don't like what you said. Now I'm gonna go deeper into what you said. It like I for a little while I was literally like, I redirected energy from reading design books to just like, okay, how can I learn how to ask questions? Like I feel stupid. I don't know how to ask questions. But I'd love for you to also touch on this a little bit, Nathan. Is just like, how do you ask questions better? Because for me, I haven't been able to find anything more effective than just practicing. But like is there anything beyond just like remembering to do it that you would recommend to ask better questions?
Well, there's the 5 whys exercise is essentially the process of continuing to like pull threads until you get at the root cause of something. So like what you're saying, where you're in a meeting, you show something you think is great, you want it to be done and just move on next thing, have everyone, you just want to be hoisted on everyone's shoulders and for there to be confetti. And the client is like, whoa, this is completely wrong. And you're like, no, I'm pretty sure this is right. You just need a little bit more time and that's actually one of the trickiest things is when you're presenting designs to people, they're having like a reaction in instant. And you've been thinking about this for days, maybe weeks. And so the thing they say, you may immediately react by thinking, oh yeah, I thought that. That was my initial thought too. And I've already gotten past that. But you cannot, the thing you absolutely cannot do, this is essentially like the opposite of listening is if you're trying to convince them of what you're saying. So it may seem like you're asking, you have to be careful. It can seem like you're asking questions when you're really just trying to point out to them that you already thought about that. What you really need to do is make sure that what you're asking is genuinely some form of the question, like, okay, so why is that? Or, you don't want it to just be, well, why? You don't want to sound like a toddler, but but you
I
do
was just
want to
gonna say that.
really, but you want to get to the root of what the question is and honestly do so, right? Like, I remember a case in particular. Um, this is actually in parenting and not in work, but I think it connects back. There was a time where I had my daughter, my youngest, was doing this thing where she was acting. She was, every time I'd see her, she would hiss. She was kind of like
Hmm.
hissing at me and doing like, it was very unpleasant. Like
Hmm.
I was trying to get ready, and I'm dealing with this kid that's basically making this like hissing sound, and like there's part of me wanted to just be like critical and say, stop that, stop doing that. I don't
Yeah.
want to see that. And then at one point, I was seeing her do that, and I thought, okay, wait. I was trying to have a little more empathy, and I asked her, well, why are you hissing? And she goes, I'm a cat. And I realized, oh, she's playing a game. She's playing the game that she's a cat. And here I am, this adult, just in this world where like that's not allowed. There's no room for that, right? And what I'm saying is that even in the business context, there's that going on too. Everyone's in their own worlds, thinking about their own things. And if you react to somebody else, it seems like they're hissing and just being unpleasant. But you need to
Right.
actually look at what's going on, see where they're coming from, and meet them where they're at, because it may not hurt you to, you know, to actually play with the cat for a minute when you're dealing with a kid or with a coworker. Just, really figure out where they're coming from and actually deal with the reality, the world that they're in.
Yeah, it's like actually care what people have to say. It's like
Mhm.
don't just make them feel heard. Like I like in chat I see like making friends of influencing people being brought up, which I love that book. But like what we're not necessarily saying here that to use like tactics, like negotiating tactics like mirroring, right? Like we're not
Right.
saying that. Like because it's
No.
not going to be helpful. You're not actually going to get anything that's going to help, that's going to give you more material to design with. And like these conversations that you have with people, like that is part of your building material. Like if you could,
Yeah.
using the metaphor of building a house, like these conversations, they are some of the building material. Like they
Yeah.
might not be something that you want anyone to see. They might be the insulation behind the walls, but they're still going to be informing what you're doing.
Mhm.
So make sure to probe. And a lot of the time, like something that I found to be a great trust building exercise that's not the funnest thing to do, but will immediately get someone on your side, is
Mhm.
mock up their idea, no matter how
Yes.
crazy it is, right? Just to show that, again, to my earlier point, like don't leave any stone unturned. That crazy, dumb idea might actually be the winner. And then you kind of like see what they were talking about and you couldn't like visualize it until you actually put it on paper. And then maybe they're like, no, that's not what I meant. I meant like move this here. And then you moved it and you're like, oh, damn, that's actually a good idea. Right.
Yeah.
So like make sure to actually understand what people are saying. And it's a lot similar to like raking your brain for those ideas that are like really hard to get to. Sometimes you have to go through the same exercise with people and probing them until it's uncomfortable, until you can't do it anymore. So that's an awesome point,
Yeah.
Nathan. A couple other things that I'd love to bring up for soft skills for higher level designers is a lot of you that have worked with more senior designers might have already like seen this done in a room, that it's like always bring the conversation up a level. Don't do it when it's completely inappropriate, but a lot of the time it is appropriate when the conversation starts to get extremely specific, like you're looking at a mock and people are starting to talk about what the button looks like, or like maybe like the column width or something like super specific. um, Always be the one to think like, okay, where's this coming from? And then always be the one to be like, okay, let's back up. Like what is the high level thing that we're trying to poke at here that's getting us to talk about this stupid specific thing? And for those of you that have worked with like higher level designers, you'll probably remember that like, oh yeah, it's always the most senior designer that's doing that. And it's not because they're trying to posture, it's because that's the answer that they're actually trying to get to. They don't care whether the button is red or blue, right? You're trying to get to like, okay, what is like the fundamental breakdown here that is coming in at a higher elevation that can be solved to solve this, not in just this page, but on several pages, because there's something that that is a gap here that we need to poke at. The next thing that I wanted to bring up is be a leader, like aspire to be a leader. Like I personally like hunger and obsess over being a leader, and a leader is not being a boss. It's not like aspiring to like manage your colleagues. A leader means that like you're looked at as someone that makes anyone around them better, right? So people are drawn to you just because by having you in their proximity, it makes them better, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing more fulfilling, and it doesn't matter, like to me, it doesn't matter if it's in UX or customer service or you're selling insurance, like the principles are the same. And the things to be mindful of, and this comes from a book that I read and kind of like committed to memory called 360 Leadership, is don't just think about managing down, think about managing sideways. And as many of you have already heard of, manage up. But the thing I want to touch on there for a second is managing sideways, because that was the new thing that I had never heard of before. It's like the peers that you actually sit next to. And the way that you manage them is by caring about them more than anyone else in the entire company. And sometimes caring might mean that like, hey, like I can see that you're completely swamped and overloaded. And I saw that you got put on that project, which I know you're not excited about. If you want, I'll pick that up and you can still take credit for it. I'll just help you out. Right? It's uncomfortable. Like you didn't get credit for anything. Like no one's going to put you on a pedestal. You just did something uncomfortable in order to help someone and show them that you care. Another example of that is if a manager is unaware of a problem that one of your colleagues is having, or maybe is just oblivious to it or is ignoring it, and like they're obviously hitting a wall and it's affecting their performance, have that crucial conversation with them. Like, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. Like earlier this year, like I've done this several times just this year, where it's like, hey, like I notice your body language has been off like for the past couple weeks. Like, is everything cool? And sometimes you might, again, have to probe a little bit, which is like, okay, I just want to let you know that like if you're overwhelmed or if you're not ramping up onto this thing fast enough, like I'm happy to help you, or I'm happy to present like XYZ to you, or I'm happy to, take some of the burden off. And a lot of the time, once you show that I'm not critiquing you, I'm offering to help you, then they'll let you know that like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing here. I'm completely underwater. I don't know any of the terminology you're using. And then you give them the resources to figure it out. And guess what? Now, like you've built up your team and you've made it more like you've upped the performance of your entire team by, picking this person up. And like now to this person, like you're their best friend on the team. So like just care about people more than anyone else, and it'll actually translate to better products and better performance.
Nice.
I'll go faster because I know that we got to get into Q&A here. Another, actually, I'm going to shut up for a second. Nathan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to jump on the point about leadership. To me, the essential skill of leadership, and people don't think of this as a skill, but I see it as a soft skill, is optimism, right?
Oh yeah, that's huge.
You show up to work, like one thing I definitely recommend everybody does is go and sit in on your developers' stand-ups. And if you sit in there, you'll see there are so many things, especially if you're in a big company, there are people who are blocked by something and some other team. There's like 2 other teams between them and the thing they need to do, and they're blocked. And you hear there are so many things to bring people down. And so, and that exists on the dev team with all the challenges they're facing. That exists in every team and every discipline. There are things that you show up to work and reality is just going to beat you down. Yeah. That's the way it is. It's like the legal's going to have reasons why you can't do that. There's going to be compliance reasons why you can't do this. There's this constant no. It's like there's this hail and sleet and badness happening all the time in the real world, right? And being effective means being in that, knowing that that's the circumstances, right? And yet being optimistic. If you're the guy who's showing up, and designers have to do this especially, right? You have to show up and hear all the reasons why you can't do something, and yet you have to design something still. You still have to come up with a solution. You have to show them something on the screen, and you want it to be something that you're passionate about, that inspires people. And the only way you can do that is to constantly be manifesting a positive outlook that, yes, we can do this. Like the yes answer and the motivation has to come from somewhere. I think designers, more than anyone, have a responsibility to show up and to make things look possible, to bring imagination to the table.
Okay, I hope you guys are capturing this, because like this one is huge and you can start doing it tomorrow. Um, to my earlier point about design visions and like higher level thinking, stuff like that. So taken done the wrong way, doing those high level things, as I said, in inappropriate conversations, those things can actually come off as super counterproductive and slow an entire project down. Whereas what Nathan is saying, like being the optimist in the room, being the one that says yes, being the one that is like okay, like this, you know, this thing is impossible technically. Let's figure out like how to still get at the design intent, you know, but just like check, do it, like take it from a different angle. That builds momentum. So I agree with you completely, Nathan, that like one of the immediate values that design brings into an organization is that we create the perception of momentum.
Yeah.
Right. Just because you design the mocks or just because you pulled together a prototype doesn't mean that the actual product is any further along than it was 6 months ago. But you can create the perception and the excitement that, oh wow, like we're like, this train is moving, like this product is evolving, right? And there's amazing byproducts to that like we as design don't even recognize most of the time. Like for example, morale. Like when engineers see really exciting stuff coming down the pike, even if they haven't committed to it, they're like, okay, I'm part of a team that has a future. Whereas like if all you're doing is like arguing with these engineers why like the stuff that they're building sucks and the stuff that you're building is so amazing and it's delightful, but everything that engineers saying that they can build sucks, right? Like that's not, it's not productive. And like that actually will cause attrition on an engineering team. And then guess what? Like if you as design are not helping keep engineering happy, like no one cares about design if there's no engineers to build what design's, you know, pulling together. So great point, Nathan. One last thing I'll bring up, because there were a couple more bullet points, but I'll just get to what I think is the most important one here so we can get into Q&A, is speak your stakeholders' language, whoever your stakeholder is. So when you're talking to engineers, don't wax poetical about like designy things. Don't you know, talk to them about how less is more and micro interactions, and just stop, right? Like listen to what they're saying, right? It's going to be really hard to listen to. Like a lot of the time it's going to be very boring stuff that you just like can't even process. And then to our earlier point, like probe, make sure you understand what they're saying, and then just sit on what they're talking about. Forget about your world. Like speak within the confines of their world, because a lot of the time the stuff that you're really excited about, it might not even be very hard to pull off, but there can be very difficult back end repercussions that they can't see past, because they're like, I've got mountains to move, and you're obsessing over these couple of boulders because you want this specific animation, right? Make sure you understand the mountains that they're trying to move, and speak in a way that like is like, try to keep up with their lingo, right? Like don't try to inject like designy words into the conversation. Like try to do the opposite. Same thing goes for business stakeholders. Like they don't care about the things that you probably really care about. Like they're just trying to move the needle on revenue, or they're trying to demonstrate to your shareholders and your board that, you know, year over year you've acquired at least 15% more users or something, right? Like understand what they're trying to do, and then run your presentations and your and filter everything that you're saying through that, right? Like reposition the things that you want to be empathetic of what they actually care about. Because the moment you start talking about pixels to a high level stakeholder, like you've completely lost them, and you've actually lost a seat at the table. They're not going to take you seriously anymore. Nathan, is there anything you would add to that?
No, that's an interesting point. I had thought about as much, but I mean, it does come up in what I was saying about sitting or going to stand up and listening in. It's almost like you're learning a new language or immersing yourself in another culture, and just spending some time in that world. Like the way you pick up a language is just by listening to it. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to stop them and figure out all of the buzzwords or the acronyms that they're using. Just spend some time listening to it and like you're saying, if you understand what the metrics are that they're trying to move, what they're really focused on, you get some ideas how to improve your presentation so that you speak to what matters to them. That's a really great point.
And Google is your friend, right? Like, don't just wait to like ask someone what an acronym meant. Like a lot of the time they're universal acronyms. Like the other day I learned what GMV means, you know, gross merchandising value. But like a lot of the time a designer will take the opportunity to say, stop, everyone, I don't know what GMV means, right? Like now you've killed the momentum of the entire meeting. So just Google's your friend. As people are talking, just like rapidly like search and figure out what they're saying. If it is proprietary, you'll figure it out, then you can follow up with that.
Yeah, we've always had one of those in the room. The person that's stopping everybody.
Yeah, and that always, like if you've got a half-an-hour meeting, like those questions will easily kill 5 minutes of that half-hour meeting.
Yeah, I'd say sometimes what I do is I'll sort of debrief after a meeting. It depends on the context. Sometimes during a meeting where it's fine, everyone is just writing notes on their laptops as it's going, and you can do that. I've been in circumstances though, one of my first managers at Amazon, I would take notes on my phone so I could, follow up on things she was saying. And she thought I was like texting or something. And I realized later that I needed to just have like a debrief. I'd like leave her office, sit down, write down all the things I needed to follow up on then. But she needed me to be like totally focused on her. And actually the best solution I had for that was carrying a notebook, right? Just having a notebook. Nobody thinks when you're writing down notes on a notebook that you're texting a friend or playing Among Us or something. But if you're sitting in a meeting and you're constantly fidgeting with the device, it tends to give the signal that you're not listening and that you're kind of tuned out.
That's a really good point. If you're staring at your phone, the assumption is you're playing Angry Birds. So point is, make sure that you guys don't kill momentum of things. Be the optimist and just capture the things that you don't know and like follow up on those things offline. Don't feel like you have to kill meetings. Okay, let's move into Q&A. For those of you that didn't notice, there's a little Q&A toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom if you're on Zoom. If you're in the Facebook Live, go into the event itself and add to the poll in the comments of the event with your questions. I'll give folks about a minute to make sure that their questions are in before I start going through them. Okay, cool. I'll start with the one with the most votes. So what's the difference between a junior, mid-level, senior in terms of capabilities? This is a great one for you, Nathan.
In terms of capabilities, I mean, clearly the more experience you have, the more capable you become. I'd say what I was saying about having a little bit more of a, if not experience across the hard skills I was describing, like writing and research, it's at least having more exposure to those disciplines and knowing how to work with them more. Like obviously, whenever you're starting out with something, you need more hand holding. You need somebody to show you the ropes. You might need to go and like look up online, like you're saying about having Google available. Anyone can go and figure out. It used to be you'd be in a meeting and somebody mentioned some method you've never heard about, and it wouldn't be straightforward. How do I go and figure out how to do this new thing? Like at one point, I just gotten done doing journey maps, and then somebody was talking about it's like service maps or something else that sounds very similar, but it's actually a different tool. And it used to be that you hear these new terms and there wasn't really a clear path forward to figure out, well, how do I go and start doing this thing now? But now you can just, Google anything and find there are people explaining how to do pretty much any UX process online and start doing it. So we all kind of have the same access in terms of what the methods are, but so really it's just experiences doing it, from you've done it before, you know what to expect when you do it. I'd say those are pretty much the key differences I expect.
And I'd also add that to me, one of the biggest differences between junior, mid-level, senior, and I would just put those all in the same spectrum, is just the elevation of your thinking. So how high are you able to think and still be effective and actually be doing design, right? It's one
Yeah.
thing to be able to talk at a high level and kind of keep up in the same room as, you know, an executive and an engineering director. But it's another thing to be able to contribute at that level.
Yeah,
And what
that's
that
it.
means and a lot of time what that means is being able to come up with the right design artifacts to keep that high level conversation going, because you might have just been given like a very specific business problem with a fairly narrow scope to go tackle, but through your due diligence you're able to up level that, hey, actually, like, this is a broader corporate problem that's a common theme across whatever our all 5 of our products in our suite. Like, this is kind of like a company layer issue, so you up level that, you create the design artifacts to be able to have that conversation, and you influence at a higher level. Like,
Yeah.
so that's less about the pixels, right? You're just using the pixels, and maybe you're even still doing the prototype so that you can provide an example. But the point isn't like, look at these exact pixels. Like, you're using pixels as a means to an end to have a conversation to drive a decision being made, right? Whereas like
Yeah.
a junior is really focused on, okay, like my boss or my PM said to do this thing, I'm going to go do this thing and I'm going to do it well. And then because I did it well, I'm going to have good metrics that show that, like, okay, I did a good job. Okay, that's kind of like
Yeah.
elementary, right? And then
Yeah.
after that is kind of like downstream, which gets to mid-level of like, in doing this project, how did I contribute to other projects? How did I kind of like drive like one level deeper of conversation in the product? And then at the highest kind of like senior, then getting into principal level, it's like, how do I change the entire company by being put on this very tactical project?
Yeah, on the point of up leveling, it makes me think of when I was working, especially early on at Artifact, the partners and the most senior level designers there, they would do this thing that it almost became like a joke. The way it would happen so commonly is that, like up leveling, they do a thing where they're sort of constantly, excuse me, constantly challenging us to see, like, well, you're thinking in the box, like whatever you're doing, they'd sort of frame that as like, oh no, you're in the box. Let's get your thinking out of the box. Like, they're always challenging you to expand your thinking and to come in and try to solve the thing from a totally different angle. And like the phrase that we usually ended up on was, the more somebody do it, eventually somebody would say, there was a key phrase that somebody would always say, well, what are we trying to do here? And like, as soon as somebody said that, you're like, okay, we've like come full circle. We've like gone beyond the point of like challenging people to get out of the box. That there's no box, nothing makes sense anymore. Yeah. Just like, but so there is a point where you can push that too far. But definitely, I think that was what really drove the real strategic thinking at Artifact, was being constantly challenged to figure out, like, how could we expand our thinking on this? How could we do this in a totally different way? How are we constrained to look at this in too narrow of a way?
Yeah, and the hard part there is, you know, we're saying up level the conversation, but you know, the what we said earlier still rings true. You have to do it in a way that builds momentum and doesn't kill momentum, and that's the hard part. So Sarah, to your question of like, how do you define a mid-level UXer, just to like get really crisp about this, like I see a junior is just doing the work that they're told, and they're doing a good job. A mid-level designer is able to actually own an entire, say, feature or a segment of a product. So they're able to start to do some of the PMing. They're kind of evaluating okay, like what are the bumps in the journey? And then when you get into senior and principal, well, actually, I'll say a senior can do it for an entire product, right? End to end, like every product, every work stream. And then a principal is able to do it at a company layer level. Like they're like everything that you do in projects, like you're able to think about the entire organization. Might be several products. Next question. So strengths and weaknesses of showcasing small feature versus big platform projects. Michelle, can you elaborate on this a little bit in chat? During interviews. Yeah, I mean, So I'll breeze through this because this is more about interviewing than it is about actual hard skills. You're usually expected to go through at least 2 case studies. So have one that dives into a feature, another that has a lot more surface area. The goal is going to be to have different strengths and weaknesses across those 2 different case studies, but also while being aware of what are the strengths and weaknesses you're trying to get across to your interviewer at the highest level, kind of at the behavioral question level. So just be intentional about what the strengths are that you're trying to get across in the case study. Let me see if I can find something that's more relevant to this specific conversation. Okay, this is a good one. So Maggie asked, if a company doesn't really understand UX and they just want someone to do the mockups fast, how do I solve for this? So it sounds like they're trying to up-level UX as a discipline in the organization, which I think is a great question.
That's classic. I mean, isn't that always the struggle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how?
Well, you always have to meet the situation where you're at, right? You can't go in and say, oh, I think you just want these quick mocks, but I'm going to take you on this journey to meet the customer and all this stuff, right? So like you always have to kind of give a little, you have to give a little to get a little, right? Like if you want more room to be able to do more UX methodology, right? Because like what they're doing is they're throwing out UX methodology and they just want the end result, which is it's a frightening situation to be in as a designer, right? Because you come in and you're like, hey, I can do all this amazing stuff, but I can do it if I have all my tools and I can go through the process and do it, right? And you show up, you show them the end product, and they're like, yeah, that's great, that's what we want. We want you to just automatically create a finished, perfect solution right now, right? And that just, I mean, the thing is, the onus is on you to show them why it's worth doing the process to get there. But you also have to work with them and produce the results they need right now. And then as you identify that, hey, you can help them like quickly visualize the things they already have in their head. And then you can start to identify, hey, there's some gaps here, and here are the tools I have to be able to help fill those and figure out what the right solution is here. So it's a little bit of a song and dance, right? Where you kind of have to deliver what they're asking for, but also let them know that, there are gaps that you need to address. It can be challenging. It really depends also on the client. Like sometimes I've worked for people, I've worked in organizations where immediately we're doing like all the UX methodology, all the process from the beginning. It was just built into the organization. And then you work in some places and they just, they don't know the first thing about what you're doing. And it's up to you, they're the client. Even if you're working in a company, in a sense, they're still your client. It's up to you to educate them, but they're not there to be educated by it. It's up to you to educate them why it's worth letting you do your job the way that your job works. When it's your boss, and they need to understand why it's going to take 2 weeks to do this instead of turning this thing around tomorrow. But at the same time, you can't. They're not there for an education, right? They hired you to get a job done. So you got to kind of get the part of the job done the way they think that they want it, and also sell them on letting you bring in more of your discipline. So.
And a lot of the time, in bringing in more of that discipline, like that just means that you're working longer hours, right? Because what they're asking you for, like it may very well just take your entire shift.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to drive the conversation of like, okay, like we need to like bring in UX as a disciplines perspective into this, a lot of time that means that you have to crank out like the additional artifacts that do that up leveling for you. And that means that you're working 5 to 8 p.m. Sometimes there's no neat way of doing this. Like it's not really like hacking the conversation. It's just demonstrating the value in the early stages of a project, so that your stakeholders give you more trust, and then you don't have to do it in your off time. Like they give you the scope to be able to pull it into your projects, but you have to demonstrate the value. You can't just pull out a textbook and be like, look, this is what the book says. We should be doing X, Y, Z. Like a lot of the time you have to just do it. And then your stakeholders will notice that like, hey, this project, like more value came out of it. Like, I wonder why. and then you it's almost like teaching by doing and providing more value than they've experienced in the past, to the point of like, you know, speak their language. Like now you're speaking your business stakeholders language because you demonstrated the value and they can connect the dollars to it. Yeah. We got another great question here that I really like here is, how do you ask for help when it feels like it's too late? So this sounds like it's like if you're already deep into a project, but you're realizing that it's time to hit a reset button. How do you do that?
That sounds like a big challenge. I feel like I need a little bit more meat around the scenario to know how to address that. It depends. I mean, you're saying you're in a situation where so you need to hit sort of a reset on the project, like you've gone. I guess it's kind of easy to imagine maybe that's the scenario we were just describing, right? You come in, somebody's telling you to just produce these mocks, right? Like we've got this idea, just build it the way we're describing it to you. You jump in, you start making it, and then you realize as you get into it that you really did need to go back and do more UX methodology, right? The challenge is the client, or in this case, if it's a company, they're the boss, right? So they need to feel like they're in control and that they're the one making those calls. You can't really go to them and say, you know what, I tried what you're saying. I've done this design work, and no, we need to do like a reset, right? I mean, that's a business decision, right? All you can really do is enable them to make that decision, to make sure that you've done your part to deliver on what you were being asked during that part. I mean, you definitely want, like, I definitely agree with everything you were saying earlier about providing vision and owning a project and driving forward. You can do that to an extent, but you also have to be respectful of the fact that there are people who they, really are going to be evaluated based on the metrics that they move. And if you're acting like you're the person who's being evaluated on that, but you're not, and then they're in conflict with you because they actually are, that's going to be a challenge. So I'd say, like, really, I think to the extent that it's within your wheelhouse, you can go back and have a difficult conversation with somebody and say, look, I tried to just jump in and deliver what you're asking. And I wanted to bring in more methodology or whatever the problem is that you think went wrong. You can try to explain it to them and say, hey, I think this has gone wrong and I'd like to try this again. But at the end of the day, as the stakeholder, as the business owner, they have to make that call. You may convince them and they may say, yeah, okay, we'll give it another couple of weeks and we'll actually do more of like a design sprint around it or something. Maybe you can sell them on that. But it's going to be challenging to do, right? Like if you're coming in basically empty-handed or feeling like you've failed and you're now trying to convince them to give you more, that's why I usually would kind of go the other tack to try and just deliver as much of what they want and make sure that they're happy. Usually it's a thing about just sort of like, you get a sense, usually they think they know what they want. And even if you look at it, you're like, there's actually bigger questions here, you can at least make them happy first and then come in and deliver more UX process, right? But if you're in a struggle with them, like I feel like you'd only end up in this place where you need to kind of do a reset if you were struggling against doing what they're saying and as a result aren't able to deliver what they have. And then I don't think you really have the grounds to recommend how you're going to proceed. They're going to tell you how to proceed because that you didn't produce the results they wanted. But if you deliver results, and then they can see why the way that you approached it was because of their call and the whole team's involvement needing more, then you'll have the room to say, okay, let's try this too. But you have to do it with optimism too. That's the other thing I'd say. It definitely, it can only be done from optimism. If you're coming in saying, oh, this sucks, this is terrible, I can't believe we ended up here, let's try something else, that doesn't sound very optimistic. You got to come in and say, hey, I think you got to see it like, I think we're on a path, there's a possibility of this being someplace good, and I think if we just try this one more thing, it'll help us get there. Like, it always has to be from a place of hope and promise and imagining a better future.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly touch on that because we are pretty much at time. Is like that's why it's great to be maintaining and kind of owning like that vision work stream, is because you have the room to be a little bit more hand wavy, and it is appropriate to ask those questions. So if you're already maintaining that and your team is already aware of the fact that like, hey, like 10% of the designer's time, they're in this kind of visiony place. Sometimes you can punt some of the questions that you're uncomfortable asking here because you feel like they're a dumb question into this conversation. And this gives you that forum in which to make sure that you're continuing to capture inputs. And selfishly, like you might have like something that you want to answer here in your day-to-day work, where it's not like it doesn't feel good to ask it here because you've created this other space in this other forum. You can ask it there. I'm gonna do one last question here, just because I think it's a really good one. Is how do you present yourself as confident and capable as a junior designer? So I'll answer this one really fast. It's touching on what Nathan said earlier, in just like be the expert, right? So what I tell a lot of my mentees, like when they do finally give me good news and they're like, hey, I got the job. It's like, okay, great. Now figure out the space that you're going to be working in, the actual vertical, not the design, the vertical. Find whatever the like best book is on Amazon, go buy it and read it before you join the job. Like onboard yourself into the space before starting the actual design work.
Yeah.
Like, once you're on the ground, like you're not going to have time to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'd also like to add to that the best thing to do when you don't have all the answers is to listen and to ask good questions. Because people, when you ask questions that get other people talking, when somebody else is the expert in the room and you're asking them questions and they start explaining things to you, it makes them feel good. And by the virtue of the fact that they feel good, the right answers are coming out, they're going to attribute that to you. Like they don't know when you ask the question, like maybe you knew the answer to the question. You threw out that question to get everyone talking. It was the right question. Like there's like obviously what you're saying about reading and getting as deep into the space so you sort of understand the space so you can ask the right questions is essential to doing that. But no one's ever going to think that you're foolish for asking relevant questions, as long as you're asking good questions and listening and just doing the most with what you hear. I think that you'll do well. I'd say the thing I'd be cautious about is I've seen a lot of junior designers come in and try to act like they are the expert, and they'll start trying to school everyone on all this stuff that they don't really know that well yet. And that looks really bad when you're a more experienced person in any discipline and you see somebody come in and being super bold and trying to show that they know everything. It really has the opposite effect. Whereas listening more, taking notes, asking lots of questions, those things never make anybody look down at you.
Yeah, and notice in your role, like if you are in your roles and there are like more senior designers that that team members tend to look up to, notice that they never act like they know the most in the room. They tend to be like the most humble designer in the room, because like the longer you spend in design as a discipline, the more you realize that like you don't know jack. And every time you start a new project, it's a clean slate and you have to learn everything all over again, right? Your design, like you can create some building blocks with your design intuition, and that's where like you're able to just ideate more. But at the end of the day, your developer and your CEO's design ideas are just as good as yours because you're not validated.
Yeah, that's why when somebody comes in acting super bold, like they know everything, trying to school everyone, it always comes off as junior, because you never see a senior person doing that.
Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today. This was an amazing session. I think we covered tons of ground. Thank you everybody for showing up. Make sure to go to uxcandor.com and explore my different mentorship resources. A bunch of it is free. The majority of it is free, and there's also a video archive so you can see all of the previous sessions that we had of these, as well as shorter form content that I've published. Make sure to find Nathan on LinkedIn. That's Nathan Roberton, and shoot him a thank you note and let him know what you got out of this session. If there's anything that you do as a thank you for, if you got something out of this session, do that. Make sure Nathan knows that he's appreciated. Nathan, group, thank you so much, and I'll see you all next month.